Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. The road is long, silent, and filled with echoes that never fade. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where truth and terror travel side by side. Tonight, we bring you 6 true, most disturbing trucker stories, chilling encounters from deserted highways, forgotten truck stops, and nights where the darkness felt far too alive. Before we begin, we've set a goal: let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help keep our wheels turning through the dark. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. Wind washed over the interstate like a slow tide, carrying drizzle and the scent of wet wheat. A long-haul driver named Glenn kept both hands lightly on the wheel, the way he'd done for years, letting muscle memory steer between luminous rumble strips and the comforting geometry of lane lines. He had been on the road since dusk, and the cab had settled into that late hours peace where the dashboard glowed like a small town in a snow globe, and the rest of the world seemed to be sleeping somewhere beyond the glass. The CB had been quiet all night. When it did hiss, it was only to rearrange a little static, as if smoothing a blanket. The rain was more of a suggestion than a storm, just enough to shine the pavement and deepen the reflections of the mile markers. Glenn took a sip from a still warm thermos and checked the clock. The route would thread him through 3 counties and across a state line before dawn. And the plan was a simple, gentle thing. Keep the rig humming. Keep the speed modest. Keep the eyes moving. Past mile 217, there was a ripple through the cab speakers. One of those coincidences where the static seemed to shape itself into a breath. Glenn glanced at the radio, and then the mirror, where the black ribbon of road unwound into forever. Nothing unusual. Then a voice edged out of the low hum. It sounded clean, clipped, as if it was coming from very close, and also very far. Unit rolling eastbound. Come on and acknowledge. You're due at the station, mile 219. Scales live. Glenn's brow folded. The way station at 219 had been shuttered for years. There were orange cones at its entrance, bleached pale by seasons, and a plywood sign that always looked like it might fall over if you blew on it. He thumbed the CB, watched his knuckles in the dashlight. Copy that. Mile 219's closed, he said, habit, even though the phrasing felt a little like talking into a dream. No answer for a few seconds. Then, like a button being pressed deliberately, the same voice returned, patient and sure. Scales live. All eastbound commercial. Please prepare to pull in. His eyes flicked to the right shoulder. The drizzle thinned as if the weather, like the radio, was taking direction from an invisible hand. Oncoming traffic fell away to nothing. Ahead, the green highway sign appeared, bright and recently washed, its reflective paint catching every hint of the headlight beam. Way station 1 mile. He'd passed that sign 1,000 times and had never seen it look new. The lettering was crisp, unnicked, and in a font just slightly off from the newer signs down the line, as if backdated to a standard not used anymore. The sense of the familiar wearing a stranger's face settled in his stomach. Glenn slowed. The turnoff appeared. Cones were stacked neatly to the side. No plywood. Sodium vapors cast a steady amber over the triangular lot, and the small brick house where officials had once stood with clipboards and jokes, leaning against the frame as engines idled. The building lights glowed behind Venetian blinds. A red open sign buzzed faintly in a window. Glenn put his signal on and eased the rig up the gentle curve, tires whispering over gravel patches. The CB let out a polite pop, as if a contact had been made. He lined up on the painted lane toward the scales. A mechanical board flicked its numbers from black to green. Proceed when directed. The glass box where the weighmaster would have sat displayed a silhouette behind the blinds, movement soft and unhurried, the gesture of someone turning a page or setting down a cup. Glenn could hear his own engine over everything else, and the rain had fully stopped. It wasn't fear that he felt, exactly. It was a respectful awareness, the same kind that approaches certain kinds of quiet rooms, churches, libraries, hospital corridors at 3 a.m. He rolled forward. The truck crept onto the pad. The suspension sighed. Inside the glass room, a small lamp lit a desk. The light had a warmth that made the edges of things look forgiving forms. A stapler, a green metal box that might have held spare bulbs. The blinds raised a hand's width. A face didn't press to the window, but the sense of regard was there, gentle and efficient. A speaker crackled. "Evening," came a voice. "Hold it there." The weight ticked into green digits on the screen. They matched what Glenn knew they should be. He released a breath he hadn't noticed he was holding. "All right," said the speaker, the tone almost companionable. "You keep your log straight?" The question wasn't accusing. It had the cadence of humor, a script from older days. Glenn popped open a side pocket and lifted out a logbook, even though the tablet on his dash did the work now. There was something comforting about flipping the paper pages, the way they still smelled faintly of printer's ink and truck stop coffee. He glanced up, the friendly absurdity of the moment easing his shoulders. The blinds dipped, the shape behind them moving toward the door. The door opened. No dramatic gust of wind pushed it, no movie sound cue. Just the simple little jingle of a metal bell on a chain, the kind you'd find at a hardware store that hadn't changed its signage since the 70s. A figure stepped out wearing a uniform cut that didn't look modern, though nothing about it was theatrical. The badge was polished. The shirt stitching looked hand-altered, tailored by someone who learned the skill in a back room. The man, if it was right to call him, that didn't come too close. He stopped at the line where the roof's overhang met the rain-slick concrete, keeping to the shelter. "Let's see," he said, voice steady. Glenn handed out the logbook. The uniformed figure took it, flipped to a page with an easy flick, and rested a cardboard straightedge along the lines like a schoolteacher grading neat work. "Looks tidy," the voice murmured. A stamp came down with a sound that was purely mechanical, purely ordinary. Thunk. The book came back. Glenn glanced at the stamp. The emblem was unfamiliar. It bore the state crest he recognized, but the shape of the seal was slightly different, as if the eagle had been facing the other way. The date impressed in purple ink made his heart step out of rhythm just once, not out of fear, but because dissonance has a way of making the body want to tap the brakes. It said June 19, and then the second part blurred in a tiny fountain of ink, where the stamp had been pressed a little too hard. He thumbed to the current date, thinking some accidental transfer had ghosted onto the page from another, but every place he looked was as it ought to be, except where that one stamp lay like a fossil pressed in wet clay. "You're good to roll," the voice said. It had that calm music that made night work bearable. "Easy on the downhill. Watch for patchy fog past the river. It's a low night." "Copy," Glenn said, because sometimes old words feel better in the mouth. He eased off the brake. The board went from red to green again, clear to go. He rolled forward, gave a small nod that nobody needed to see. On the way back to the on-ramp, the amber lot's lights seemed to flicker, but not fail. The drizzle reappeared with a decorum that felt timed. He merged, blinked, and put his rig back on the dark silk of the interstate. 2 miles later, he passed another sign. "Way station 1 mile." He checked the clock. It had moved normally. He looked to the right shoulder, searching for the coned-off entrance, because he had just pulled through there. The cones were back, leaning, the plywood painted with stenciled letters. Station closed. The lot beyond sat black and empty. The small brick building unlit as a photograph cut from a different year. Glenn's hands tightened by an imperceptible degree. He breathed, slow and measured. The CB sizzled. "All eastbound," said a voice that was less a sound than the memory of one. "You're good to roll. Have a safe night." He didn't answer. He let the sound pass like a wave and focused on the white lines sliding under him. The fuel gauge was honest, the engine temp steady. The wipers shushed along in their gentle metronome. At the county line, he pulled into a service plaza not because he needed anything urgently, but because sometimes a well-lit shoulder offers proof that the world remains anchored. The building's lights were bright, warm, innocent in the way of vending machines. A handful of night shift faces moved through like calm fish in an aquarium. He stepped down from the cab, felt the cool, damp air, and listened to the distant hiss of highway water being thrown by other tires. Inside, a coffee machine thumped to life. Glenn stood at the counter, waiting for the cup to fill. To his right, a trucker with a gray braid and a denim jacket that had soaked up decades of diesel smell eyed his reflective vest in the glass. Rain down your way? The man asked. Conversational. A bit, said Glenn. The cup ended with a polite whir. He set a lid on it. He reached into the pocket of his vest and pulled out the logbook without thinking, the way people pull out photographs to check if the memory matches the image. The purple stamp sat there, the emblem slightly wrong. The date looked more legible now, or maybe his eyes had adjusted to how it wanted to be seen. 1979. June. The man with the braid turned, his eyebrows hiking the barest degree. He didn't touch the page like it might burn him or bless him. He just looked. Haven't seen one of those in a while, he said, voice not unkind. Used to come through after fog. Not everywhere. Glenn didn't say anything at first. The hum of refrigerated cases filled the little hush between people. You've seen this? He asked, keeping his tone neutral. Years back, said the other driver. Not always the same mile. Not always the same seal. Folks say it's just how the air bends sound and light. He let the idea sit on the counter, like a coin, and then nudged it along. Folks say other things too. Best to take the gift. They never troubled anybody I knew. Always reminded a person to slow down for the river. Glenn nodded. The kind of nod that doesn't pretend to know more than it does. The coffee was hot. He thanked the man with the minimum number of words required to keep the moment from turning into anything larger than it needed to be. He stepped back into the night, which smelled simple and good, like wet pavement and leaf edges. Back in the cab, the CB was quieter than silence somehow. He placed the logbook on the passenger seat and drove. The road offered itself as a straight kindness. Past the river, the fog pooled low and elegant, like silk tucked into the folds of the land. He dropped a gear and eased through, the headlights cutting a cautious fan that felt respectful, not invasive. When the sky softened to a deep blue that promised morning might exist after all, his dispatch pinged through on the tablet. A short line of text. All good? He typed a reply, thought about adding something else, and then didn't. He could mention the way station when the story had cooled a little, when he could decide what words would make it behave. They finished the exchange with routine notes, delivery window, fuel price at the next stop. Hours later, after the drop had been signed and the sun had climbed high enough to remind the world of its edges, Glenn drove back through the corridor of highway where the station had appeared. It was daytime now. The lot sat as it had for years, grass pushing at the cracks, a small bird perched on the top of a sign as if assigned there. He pulled in, eased the rig gently over the broken paint, and parked. The door to the brick building was chained. A faded notice, brittle and translucent in places, explained closure due to budget, dated more than a decade back. He walked along the length of his truck, boots crunching. In daylight, the place wasn't eerie. It was simply retired, like a workhorse that had deserved a quiet pasture. And found it. At the edge of the concrete, something caught his eye, and he crouched. A rusty can sat half buried in the gravel, the label weathered to a palette of soft browns and pale blues. He couldn't read the brand, but the price was stamped on it in a style that had gone out of fashion. He set it back. The sound it made was unremarkable, but felt like a punctuation mark. That night, he parked in a familiar lot with other rigs, the glow of their cab lights turning the place into a small constellation. In the quiet after he'd set the brakes and pulled the curtain half closed, he opened the logbook once more. The purple stamp hadn't smeared or bled. It sat there as clean as a fresh thought. He ran a finger over it and felt the faint texture of raised ink. The CB, idle all evening, let out a short, polite chirp, the kind of sound you'd get if someone tested a mic and decided not to speak. Then, very gently, as if the words were being set on a table and slid across without a fuss, came the same voice. Safe night, eastbound. Keep it steady. There were no tricks left in the day to play. The sound didn't recur. He rested in the bunk, as the truck ticked softly with the heat of the engine cooling. Whatever had happened in the same category as rain that starts at the exact moment you need it to clean a windshield. It didn't ask to be understood, and it didn't require trust in anything other than the habits that had gotten him across the map for as long as he'd been driving. Keep the speed modest, keep the eyes open, keep a hand on the log even when a screen glows brighter. After he'd fallen into the long, level breath of sleep, a passing rig a few lanes over keyed its mic and said goodnight to nobody in particular, in a voice that sounded a little old-fashioned and perfectly content. The air accepted it without drama. Somewhere in the closed, quiet brick building off mile 219, a bell on a chain did not ring. Somewhere on a desk, a lamp that had never been plugged into anything no longer cast its soft pool of light. Before dawn returned again, fog spread across the river like a friend laying a blanket, and the reflectors in the center line gleamed. The sign for the way station stood at its post, wearing drizzle like a silver meant to be polished. Trucks passed by, one by one, traveling companionship at a distance. If any of them heard a voice telling them to take it easy on the downhill, they didn't say so, but many of them did. And if anyone found a purple stamp in an old logbook sometime down the road, the ink would be dry and the date would look both wrong and right at once. Story number 2. The air was cool enough to feel like glass, and the night had that hollow stillness that comes after a day of wind. A driver named Mara rolled through the plains with the kind of focus that feels like a thread pulled taut between the mind and the road. The trailer was sealed in ordinary industrial paper, strapped tight, no special instructions beyond keep it moving, and watch the crosswinds beyond the county line. She had taken a long nap midday to be fresh for the overnight miles. It worked. Mostly. The dash clock blinked 2:13 a.m., an hour that made the world seem like a backstage hallway. The route stretched straight as an arrow for miles, then bent toward a cluster of lights that rose out of the dark like a small town. The sign for Golden Basin Service Plaza flashed up clean and modern, the kind of sign with a big friendly font and icons for showers, coffee, and a dog walking patch. She knew it by reputation, a good place, plenty of pull-throughs, decent tea, enough seating that you didn't have to share a table with your own elbows. Mara didn't need fuel. She didn't need food, but she wanted 10 minutes of warm light and a cup that steamed when she held it. Sometimes that was the difference between a good quiet night and a strange one. She signaled and took the gentle exit ramp. The plaza spread out like a careful diagram under LEDs that made the pavement look almost blue. Rows of trucks rested in clean lines, some with sleepers curtained, some with a sliver of golden light behind the fabric, soft as a nightlight in a child's room. A maintenance cart drifted along the perimeter at walking pace, its orange beacon rotating in a lazy, dignified rhythm. There was no litter, no broken glass underfoot, just a slight smell of wet concrete and soap, as if the place had recently been washed. A laminated sign by the entrance announced quiet hours and reminded drivers to idle low. The typography was thoughtful, the wayfinding arrows a cool white. The main doors breathed warm air and cough drops fragrance when they opened. Mara stepped inside, grateful for the hush. The tile floor gleamed. The vending machines were stocked with things that pretended to be food, but were really edible puzzles, and a wall of refrigerated drinks hummed in a key that matched the lights. At the counter, a clerk in a navy vest and a neat name tag smiled without showing too many teeth. The kind of smile that said, yes, it's late, yes, you are welcome, and no, nobody will talk too loudly. Tea? The clerk asked, as if guessing what the moment required. We've got a good mint tonight. Sounds perfect, Mara said. Her voice sounded larger in the air than it had in the cab, and she softened it without thinking. The steaming cup came with a lid and a sleeve that said Golden Basin Cares in serif letters. The logo was a bird in flight. The bird's wings were arranged in a circle like a coin, pretty in a way that logos usually weren't. On a nearby monitor, a weather ribbon scrolled quiet warnings about patchy fog over a distant river, which was hours behind her. The clerk gestured toward a side room where chairs reclined slightly and small lights glowed from behind frosted panels. Restroom if you need it, the clerk said. Low light. No announcements. People like it. Mara nodded politely but felt no want to sit. She had too much road hum in her bones to let it drain out completely. 10 minutes was the plan, not 40. She thanked the clerk, tucked the tea under her chin to warm her face for a second, and went back into the night. The lot looked somehow even tidier than when she'd pulled in. The maintenance cart had completed a loop and was making another, a measured circle around the outer ring, white letters on its side, declaring Basin Services in a font just too tasteful to be municipal. The beacon kept turning. The air had the faintest scent of pine cleaner and damp asphalt. Mara walked the length of her rig out of reflex hands on tires, gloved knuckles tapping at swing doors, eyes on lines of light catching the edges of reflective tape. Everything looked right. She climbed back up, set the cup in the holder, and started the engine as gently as possible. She eased toward the lane marked Exit to Eastbound with a bright arrow. The paint was crisp, unscuffed. She followed it around a curve, past a row of dark cars, and found herself back by the main entrance again. The arrow on the pavement pointed the other way this time, a clean reverse, as if the direction had always been that way and she had simply misread it the first pass. "Okay," she said to herself, and smiled at the way the words sounded in the cab. She gave a small wave toward a driver walking a dog in a bright little coat. The dog looked up, ears pricked, as if it had heard its name in another room. She swung left and followed exit to eastbound again, ignored the impulse to take the sharper right, and came out by the fuel island where a man in a knit hat held a squeegee like an oar. Trucks sat at the pumps like ships in dry dock, but nobody was fueling. The island attendant nodded once, ordinary as a streetlight. Beyond the island, the exit arrows pointed past a hedge cut into rectangles. Behind the hedge, she could just make out the outer road that would curl back to the interstate. She followed the lane. A sign warned of a speed bump. She crossed it at a crawl. The hedge ended. The maintenance cart appeared ahead, making its round, beacon still turning. The word exit was painted on the pavement in great friendly letters. A directional arrow stretched like a ribbon. She drove toward it. The lane curved, joined another, and then another. The word exit presented itself again, fresh as a new idea, pointing in the exact same direction as before. Mara blinked, because it didn't feel like a loop exactly. It felt more like an instruction that kept being restated for emphasis. She kept moving. The tea was warm in her near hand. A bus idled in a far corner, its interior lights on, empty seats glowing the soft gray of unattended things. The CB livened with a small whisper of static. A voice came through low power, local, the kind of short-range broadcast that sometimes announces cleaning or a spill. "Attention eastbound," said a neutral, rehearsed tone. "Exit east is closed for late-night service. Please proceed to west exit and rejoin highway from there. Thank you for your patience." Mara glanced at the map on her dash. The little blue dot sat without moving, as if the world had decided that any direction inside the plaza counted as standing still. The map showed the plaza as a neat shape with two branching exits like arms. She chose the lane marked, "West exit, model drivers please merge early," and smiled at the idea of a model driver. She merged. She turned. She passed a man with a broom who gave a comfortable thumbs up. Not big, not official. Just two humans at a night job sharing the easiest human signal. West exit carried her past the truck scale that was quiet and unnecessary in a place like this. She rolled toward a strip of roadway that looked straightforward and came out, with a short, soft surprise that felt almost like amusement, back by the main entrance again. A family van with a cargo box on the roof rolled in and parked where she had seen a different van earlier. The dog in the bright coat walked by with the same neat trot, tail making shapes in the air like a metronome. The attendant at the fuel island swiveled the squeegee the other way. Mara didn't swear. She didn't frown. She let the engine idle and breathed. The plaza was not threatening. It was pleasant to the point of being a little unreal. A hotel lobby with curbs. It made a person want to relax and stay. She could take the hint and nap an hour. She could use the recliners with the light behind frosted glass and let the brain reset. But something about the slightly too practiced curve of the arrows scratched at the part of her that drove nights so often. She had begun to think in reflectors and ramp lengths. She put her hazard flashers on and checked her mirrors carefully. No one was behind her. She set the brake and sat still. The maintenance cart drifted past the entrance again, beacon rotating. She watched it in the mirror until it vanished behind the building. Somewhere in the lot, an HVAC unit clicked on. The sound folded into the general hum without breaking it. Under it, so faint it almost wasn't a sound, something buzzed. Not the high whine of LED drivers. Not the ballast of old fluorescent tubes. It was more like the memory of a fluorescent tube. The absence of a buzz where one should have been. Mara sipped tea and looked at the way the light laid itself on painted instructions. The newest paint glowed back bright white blue. Older paint on the lot in handicap symbols, in a faded fire lane near hydrant, was warmer, chalkier. The exit arrows were the newest things there. The caution stripes on the speed bump were the second newest. The tiny, nearly invisible ghost of an older arrow, scrubbed and repainted, lay under the newer arrow like a penciled line under a marker stroke. She looked at the light poles. Most had clean heads with panels of LEDs behind tempered glass, humming in their mild, assertive key. One, way at the end of the row by a small worker's shed, had a head that was slightly different. The lens was a little domed, the color a touch more yellow. It didn't hum at all. Either it was newer than the rest or older than the rest by a long mile. Under it, the pavement caught the glow and returned it without that metallic sheen. Instead, the surface looked softer, like paper. She released the brake, canceled hazards, and rolled carefully toward that quieter light. The paint under it was less crisp. An old arrow lay there in a paler white, pointing in a direction that the new arrows had overwritten. Half its tail was ground away by years of turning rubber. It pointed toward a practice of traffic that had stopped being current, like the old way customers used to line up at the counter before the kiosk went in. The lane it indicated hugged the edge of the lot in a line that no one, based on recent paint, was meant to take. She put a toe on the accelerator and followed it. The lane took her behind a outbuilding with a sign that said, Supplies in faded letters. A vending machine for truck wash tokens stood there, its display off. The maintenance cart's tracks were visible on the damp concrete, a cute zigzag where the driver had perhaps gotten bored. The arrow carried her into a narrow cut between the hedge and the fence. The fence gate held a lock the size of her palm, but the gate was already open, its chain threaded like an ornament. On the other side, a slab of old pavement curved toward the highway. The kind with tiny river stones visible in the aggregate, the kind poured when corners were sharper and the engineer's hand still appeared in the curve. Mara checked mirrors, rolled out, and felt the particular kind of relief that comes not from escape, but from confirmation that instincts are still worth their salt. The slab joined the ramp at a shallow angle. She merged. The interstate took her back with a quiet welcome only a driver would feel. The direct, uncomplicated forwardness of lanes unwinding. Her tea had not yet gone cool. She looked back once. Where the exit should have been, the plaza hovered like a thought about a place, rather than the place itself. Its outline seemed less absolute. The letters on the main sign were readable, then unreadable, then simply not there. Then the median rose and fell, and the plaza was gone behind a fold of land, replaced by the hiss of tires and the patient crawl of stars. A minute later, a green sign insisted with cheerful authority, Golden Basin Service Plaza 8 miles. She stared at it for one heartbeat and let out a sound that might have been a laugh if she hadn't been alone. The phone map brightened and updated. The blue dot obeyed again. The CB cleared its throat with a tidy buzz and returned to silence. As the road flattened out, she passed a trooper tucked under an overpass. The car's light bar glowed with a low, steady presence, not flashing, just existing. She dropped her eyes to her speed, out of habit, and kept it righteous. The black windows of the trooper car reflected her rig in miniature, one moving line of light on another line of light. Another truck moved up in the left lane, paced her for a moment, then coasted forward. The other driver looked over, his face in the blue of his own dash, then keyed his CB. "You catch the basin tonight?" he asked, not asking too hard, as if inquiring if she'd seen a deer a couple miles back. "Rolled through," Mara said. Briefly. "Good. Friendly place," the voice said, and there was something in the way the word friendly sat that made it sound like a warning wrapped in silk. "If you take the exit by the propane tanks, easy out. If you don't, they'll wind you around a bit. They mean well." "They?" she said lightly. Because sometimes a pronoun can wave at a whole idea without naming any single thing. "Whoever keeps it shining," he said. "Heard a story once from a night shift janitor about old arrows underneath new ones. That kind of thing." He said, "Drive where the ground looks tired. The newest paint wants you rested. The older paint wants you gone." His laugh was pleasant. "You get what I'm saying?" "Copy," she said. The other truck slid ahead, tail lights as tidy as punctuation. The highway spread. She let the hum of the tires smooth her breath long again. She did stop at Golden Basin 8 miles later, and the place there looked equally generous. A different layout, a different hedge, less manicured, maybe more real. The logo on the door had the same bird, but the bird's wings opened along a different arc, more like a check mark than a circle. She ran inside because her tea was done, and the idea of another felt good. The clerk this time wore no vest, just a sweater, and the tea, while warm, came with a sleeve that had the words, "Drive safe," in block letters, and no bird at all. On a bulletin board near the restrooms, A poster from the State Highway Department reminded travelers about fatigue. The headline read, "The best rest aren't traps, coos them consciously." Mara read it and let the word traps do its trick and then put it away. Not everything that was sticky was glue. Sometimes things just wanted a person to quit pretending they were invincible and sit in a chair with the sound turned down. She didn't sit. She thanked the clerk, walked back out, and found her truck where she'd left it in a patch of light that flickered once, and then held steady. In the seat, she flipped the older T-sleeve over, and noticed that on the inside someone had printed a message in small, clean letters. "You will always have time to rest. Take it before it takes you." She didn't remember seeing that when she'd left the other place. It looked like the sort of phrase that could be printed on any sleeve anywhere. She decided not to worry about where. The rest of the night unfurled like ribbon. A deer crossed far ahead, a shape the road offered as trivia and not as a test. The odometer clicked delicately. The hum through the cab floor was a steady hand. She delivered just after dawn, the warehouse lights bright even under a sky that was pretending not to be cloudy. A receiver signed with a neat signature that made it look like they were proud of their handwriting. The day smelled like cardboard and coffee, one of the good combinations. 2 afternoons later, she saw a driver she recognized at a fuel island 3 states away. He wore the same knit hat, the same easy posture, and he raised his chin a degree in greeting. "Basin last week held me for an hour," he said conversationally, as if continuing a conversation they hadn't started. "Got comfortable, too comfortable, took a nap, woke up and felt like I'd been there a year." "How'd you leave?" Mara asked, curious, because sometimes a detail from another person's version of your experience explains the part you felt but didn't name. "Followed the scuffs," he said promptly. "Don't follow the instructions. Follow the evidence. Pavement remembers where most of us go. Paint remembers where someone wants us to." He paused. Place is probably there to keep a person alive. But the feeling of being kept isn't for everybody. She thought about that all the way to the line of trees that held the next horizon up. Later, when the sun was low and the world turned that metallic color that makes rivers look like hardware, she passed a small state-maintained plaza with a simpler sign and a gravel overflow lot. She could have pulled in. She didn't need to. The truck breathed at a steady 62, miles still to go, the world still looking like a long, polished rail. Not long after, the sky darkened again in a way that meant true night. Out there, one can start to sense the shape of the spaces. Places that slow you down, and places that let you slip by. The memory of the plaza returned. The circle, the hum, the softness. She didn't dislike it. She just liked the road more. There are stops out here that wish you well, and send you on your way with a hot cup and a nod. There are others that bend time enough to coax you gently toward a deeper rest. If you need it, they make a case for it until you can't argue. If you don't, they wait you out, smiling. They keep their floors clean, and their lights barely buzzing, and their beacons turning like lighthouses on quiet nights. No harm meant. Maybe no harm done. Only a small rehearsal for the day when stopping is the wisest move a person can make. On another night, miles east and weeks later, Mara rolled past a field where nothing was planted, and the sky was a wide, shallow bowl. And she saw a maintenance cart parked under a light with a domed lens, unoccupied, beacon off. It sat there like a prop between performances. She eased on. The cart did not move. The plaza she had passed hours earlier, whichever version of it that had chosen to open its doors, likely stood with its doors open still, welcoming the carefully tired and the careful. The old arrows lay under the new. The worn path waited to be noticed. The road kept making its case, mile after mile, pretty as a line drawn steady by a patient hand. She kept her hands light on the wheel, and her mind in that quiet place a good driver finds when the night is long and the distance is honest. For the rest of that run, the exits she took were the kind you left just as easily as you entered. They let her go the way a page lets a reader pass on to the next, softly, with no sound at all except the whisper of a corner turned. Story number 3. The refrigerated unit behind the cab kept its quiet promise, humming at a steady temperature that made the air inside the truck feel a degree cooler than the night outside. A driver named Luis watched the highway lift and fall like a slow tide along the foothills, the kind of long, patient grade that asked for modest speed and rewarded it with an easy engine note. The moon had taken the evening off. Clouds hung like a curtain, soft and uncommitted, reflecting a faint silver from a town that was miles behind him now. He had fruit on, palletized and wrapped, scent tucked away behind seals and numbers that would make someone else's morning run smooth. The pass he was aiming toward had a way of making radios sound more important than they had all day. As the road climbed, Channel 19 got busier in those polite, minimal spurts that truckers use when the night is calm, short warnings about a trooper at a median cut, a scrap of weather, a friendly check on the grade. Luis kept his hands relaxed, his eyes in their rhythm across mirrors and lines, the dash clock a soft green. He'd driven this corridor in summer heat and winter glaze and every middle mood, and he liked it best in the kind of cool that tightened the world's edges without turning them sharp. Past mile 139, a variable message sign ahead glowed to life on the shoulder where the pass started to gather its spine. The amber text scrolled with an unfussy authority that made attention feel natural. Rock slide risk beyond MP 143. Detour next right. Follow blue chevrons. The phrase blue chevrons had the feel of something official and specific. He had followed orange detours and white detours and once a pink one for a charity run, but he couldn't recall blue. Maybe a newer system, maybe a pilot project. It didn't matter. When a pass hinted at stones on the move, one listened. 2 cars peeled off ahead of him toward a turnout that was really just an overlook under normal circumstances. A slow vehicle lane opened. He checked his distance, signaled, and took the next right at the polite insistence of the sign. The ramp dipped onto older concrete that showed its age in a soft, honest way aggregate smoothed by decades, cracks filled with a gray that matched the evening. Cones hugged the edges, not in a frenzy, just steady company. A portable aero board sat on a trailer at the entry. Its lights blinked an inviting, measured left, 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 the bulbs a slightly different amber than the highway sign had been. In the mirror, another rig chose the main line and carried on. For a moment, its taillights hung in the dark like held breath, and then vanished around a bend. The detour lane threaded through a stand of trees that had once been an orchard. The trunks lined up with the geometry that orchards love, even though many of the branches were ghost branches now, cut back to let wild grass take over. Old wooden ladders leaned against 2 of the trees, their rungs soft and pale. Objects that had been left a long time find a way to belong where they came to rest. The smell in the cab shifted a little as he rolled his window down a crack, a hint of damp earth and something sweet that had no business being present in late autumn. He thought of those small country fruit stands with hand-lettered signs that sell cold cider and paper cups of sliced apples dusted with cinnamon. He smiled without meaning to. There they were, the blue chevrons the sign had promised. They weren't painted on asphalt. They were embedded reflectors set into the center line and the outer edges, small glass lozenges that caught his headlights and returned the light not as a glare but as a quiet glow, almost matte. Lines of them on either side, and then a broken line down the middle, each piece lighting in the beam like a nod. He'd seen a few of the old glass cat's eyes on vintage 2-lanes, green or amber, but these were blue as a cool lake at dusk. He followed them without thinking hard about why. A voice came through the radio with the unhurried cadence of somebody working night shift and meaning every syllable. Eastbound if you're on the orchard cutoff. Maintain 35. Chevron markers indicate the path. Courtesy patrol at the bridge. You'll be fine. The tag at the end was a number, not a handle, like an old department call sign. The way "you'll be fine" was said gave it the quality of a quote rather than an empty reassurance. The kind an elder says when they can't hand you proof, only experience. Luis answered out of reflex. "Copy," he said, tone even. He liked that his own voice sounded calm. Sometimes sound steadied thought. He listened for a reply, but the radio slipped into that kind of silence that feels like a settled room. The road tightened a little, the kind of curve that makes an inattentive hand drift but a watchful hand find smooth. The blue reflectors led him on like crumbs left in a forest, if crumbs glowed softly and kept their distance. On his right, in a field where he remembered a billboard for a local tire shop, a small building showed itself, wood darkened by a century of weather. A sign above the door spelled out "Cedar Today," in letters that had been painted by a careful hand with a fatigue of years in it. The door was closed. The porch broom bristled with old straw shorn blunt. A single green bulb over the porch wasn't on, though it looked perfectly capable of working. He slowed at a set of sawhorses, the kind used to mark a taper where a lane needs to squeeze. A flagger stood beyond them holding a sign that read, "Slow" in black on bright orange. reflective beads catching the light in precise little stars. The figure wore a hard hat and vest, tape glowing that responsive glow that never quite turns into light of its own. Everything about him was regulation, but the hard hat shape was slightly older, the brim shorter. The man lifted the sign a degree as if acknowledging an old friend, and made the kind of small, circular motion with the wrist that means, keep it moving, nice and easy. On his belt hung a radio with an antenna that was longer than modern ones. A detail, yes, but details are how the night tells itself. Luis rolled forward at an obedient pace. He glanced left, half expecting the flagger to key a mic. A voice came through again, timed a beat later, as if the words had been edged into the air in the moment just past. Stand by 5. Let them clear the overpass. He set the brake for the briefest pause. 5 counted itself out almost to the second. The kind of pause that feels crafted rather than accidental. During it, somewhere ahead and out of sight, a deep thrumming rolled through the ground, low as a giant cat purring from engines maybe, or the bridge itself responding to something heavy. Then the sound faded. The flagger lifted the sign, flipped it with a neat twist, so that slow turned to a face of the paddle that simply said go in letters less bright, as if the manufacturer had made the word reluctantly for rare use. Luis eased up the grade. The orchard ended in a stone wall that ran alongside for a few yards, old river rock mortared in a style nobody uses anymore because of time and money. The detour curved toward a truss bridge that rose out of the dark, with the confident angles of something designed before decorative touches were an afterthought. Its steel was the color of the night. Small marker bulbs, that cozy orange common to machinery and Christmas windows alike, tracked across the structure in a measured line. 1, 2, 3, then out. The blue chevrons led straight across. The river below said nothing, though the sound it made in cold weather had a silver to it. On the far side, a small truck sat angled into a turnout. Courtesy Patrol, in reflective lettering that made the words ride up the viewer's eyes. A figure stepped out and gave a thumbs up at a distance. The gesture was unshowy, as if it had been practiced since the beginning of the gesture's invention. He did not wave anyone over. He did not slow them down. He only existed as proof that someone was counting cars and trucks and making sure they belonged in the number of this hour. The patrol truck's light bar was present, but quiet. No flash, no fanfare. A helper without drama. Eastbound on the orchard, the radio said. You'll feed back in at 148. Don't rush. Ridge clears by then. The voice could have been the same as before, or another person wearing the same tone like a uniform that fit everyone. The phrase, ridge clears, had the neatness of local speak. Passes accumulate their own names for their moods. Luis let himself be carried by the idea that the road would calendar itself, and he would merely meet it on schedule. The detour's lane lines were narrower than the main lines, paint a little chalkier, the edge rumble strips simpler. He liked how the truck felt here, deliberate and kind of purposeful in a way the slick interstate sometimes smoothed over. Every few hundred feet, a small square of reflective tape on a guardrail post flashed blue-white with the chevrons, as if tipping its hat. The reefer maintained its contented murmur. The engine responded like it knew the route, at mile 147 by his dash map, though the detour had its own life with regard to numbering. A lighted sign appeared. Not neon, and not LED, but something like a box with a glass front and black letters dropping into slots. Lane narrows, it said, the words too calm to be warning. He lifted his foot anyway, enough to be on the sane side of caution. The hedgerow pressed closer for a blink, then unfolded again like a page open to the next chapter. When the rise flattened, the blue chevrons pulsed a little brighter for a handful of reflectors, as if to signify something important. Up ahead, 2 lanes joined, left yielding to right. The merge was clean, just enough extra space, the kind of design that respects drivers who don't need to be nagged. The courtesy patrol truck appeared in the mirror now, parked at the mouth of a gravel access, as though it had always been there, as though it had driven through the soil instead of on it. The detour ended the way good detours do, unremarkably. It delivered him to a lane that simply was the highway he'd left, no ceremony. The first thing he saw on the main line was a blank variable message sign, dark. Then, 1 mile later, another message sign slogged back into life, just in time to tell anyone reading it that the earlier warning no longer applied. Crash cleared at MP 143. Expect normal traffic. If anyone had argued with the timing, the sign would have won based on seniority alone. Luis checked the time. 22 minutes had dissolved since he'd left the main line. No delay. He wouldn't be early, and he wouldn't be late. He rode the idea for a moment. That being moved around an obstacle on a night like this was less a diversion and more a correction. Hands on a back steering wheel that turned from somewhere beyond his own cab. He drove until the pass let go into the soft plateau east of the ridge, and then he took the first official rest area because the beverage he liked tastes best on a table that isn't vibrating. A coffee maker dripped deliberately. He added nothing to it, took it plain, walked back outside to the line of machines chewing at the night in all the right ways. Another driver in a high-vis jacket nodded his chin. "They opened the cutoff?" the man asked, as if they had both been waiting for this moment for months. "What cutoff?" Luis said, not playing coy but resisting the urge to make a story out of the last half hour, when it still felt like a picture developing. "The old Orchard Road," the man said, stirring something in his cup that made no sound. "Blue markers. Highway used to make us take it when they were clearing rock before they beefed up the slope. Only ever saw it at night, though. Daylight. You'd swear it's a pasture and some trees." He shrugged in a small way. "People call when they see the chevrons. Office says they don't have that system. But sometimes the ridge needs a minute. I figure it borrows what it needs." Luis let the words settle. "You've gone that way?" he asked. "Twice," the man said. He lifted a finger. "Once when there was ice behind the bend. Once when a pickup found the guardrail before I got there. Both times I came out without seeing a soul except a flagger, who looked like he'd step off shift and into a black and white photo. I waved anyway. Seemed right. They finished the small talk that strangers use to address the larger thing without touching it directly. The other driver left with the easy roll of someone who knew exactly how his weight felt on each axle. Luis sat in the night air a minute longer, sleeve warming against a cup, and thought of the green porch light over the cider shack that hadn't been on, though it had looked capable. He felt lucky in a way he wouldn't call luck. A sensible gratitude that he had driven a good road, and the road had answered by staying a good road. Later, parked at a receiver's lot with the light guarded by that worldwide wall of chain link everyone knows, he scrolled his dashcam footage out of pure curiosity. The highway looked ordinary in that way that camera footage flattens, the way it drains the romance but keeps the data true. The moment the detour began, the reflectors showed themselves in such a saturated blue that the lens struggled a little to reproduce it. The arrow board at the entry recorded as a rectangular shape with no lights visible. The flagger existed in frame for 3 seconds as a reflective vest without shoulders to fill it. A bright slow sign, then the bright go, then gone. The courtesy patrol truck came through as a box on a pullout, reflective lettering throwing back the headlight beam in letters that were only partially legible. Court Pat. The voice on the radio, recorded as it always was, clipped and attached to the video, sounded exactly as it had sounded in the cab. Unhurried. Unspectacular. Precise. He watched it all once and then put it away, not out of fear but because he didn't need a replay to be convinced of what the night had offered. The next afternoon, on his way back west with an empty trailer and a different sky, he exited at the overlook under a bold sun that turned every surface into an honest thing. He walked the shoulder to the place where he remembered the ramp should be. There was no ramp. There was a guardrail continuous as a sentence with no commas. The grass beyond waved and held the low shine of autumn. Down in the ditch, where water had washed the past clean to a shallow line, a small disc of glass lay half buried in the mud, blue as a marble, its back silvered and pebbled where light would have brushed it. He crouched and looked at it. He did not pick it up. It wasn't meant for someone's pocket. It belonged to something larger than a collector's shelf. He drove on. The ridge was steady. The rock faces had the polite veil of netting that modern engineering drapes over them in certain sections, a clever curtain to catch what gravity forgets. He passed mile 143 without incident, and the only stones that moved were the ones a small creek rolled along at its own pace below. In the weeks that followed, he found himself noticing the blue in ordinary things differently. The way emergency markers reflect in rain, the cold, faithful blink of runway lights when flights he couldn't see were finding their lines in the sky, the thin seam of dawn on a very clear morning. When a variable sign asked him for an adjustment merge, reduce, give a minute, he gave it. He had always been the type to comply, not from a love of rules, but from a respect for how many moving parts go into making a road behave in the dark. Sometimes at night, a gentle voice on the radio would come up, name a mile marker, and ask the eastbound or westbound to hold steady a minute. The phrasing would be tidy. The tone would be courteous. And always, in the space between the request and the reply, he would feel that small, measured pause he'd learned to recognize a window for something to pass safely by that he might never see. When he rolled again, the wheels sounded a little different in the first yards, like tire rubber brushing old concrete before settling back into modern asphalt. He did not go looking for the orchard cutoff when he didn't need it. But if the chevrons ever presented themselves again, he would respect the invitation not because he wanted a story, but because his steering wheel liked to meet the road exactly where the road wished to be met. In stretches where the land lay quiet and the sky forgot to draw stars, the reefer hummed with the same patient compact it had held all along. Somewhere nearby on a ridge or a shoulder, a courtesy patrol might have had a thermos of its own and a log of cars and trucks counted, a column marked through and a column marked held, and a simple satisfaction with both numbers. The orchard itself, if that's what it had been, may have had a season where it mattered to keep things in order, rows even, ladders mended, fruit taken in, and maybe that discipline had bled into the roadwork for a while and stayed behind as a shape the night could reuse whenever it needed organization. However it lived, it behaved kindly. It kept scores to itself, and when the ridge cleared and the pass breathed evenly again, it folded like a portable sign and slipped into the scenery in a way that protected everything about it from becoming a curiosity beyond the miles that actually needed it. A lot of roads at night are only as safe as the quiet coordination of people who will never meet engineers with lamp plans, drivers with good judgment, crews who know the feeling of a long sleeve of reflective tape under their thumb. Sometimes, perhaps, older alignments and subtle guardians add their own version of coordination, a detour that minds itself and minds you without asking for thanks. Luis kept going with that in his hands and in his line of sight. The pass behind him, present tense ahead, more miles, more signs, more breath. Somewhere far behind, an unlit green porch light waited with perfect patience for the handful of nights a year when it would be required to glow. Story number 4. Low country night lay over the highway like a calm river, black and smooth, reflecting only what dared to shine. A driver named Celine guided her tractor east with a steadiness that matched the temperature-controlled heartbeat of the trailer behind her. She liked these miles, the kind that stretched flat and honest, with marsh grass off the shoulders and a whisper of brine drifting in from the unseen inlets. On either side, distant lights sat low like towns had bent down to tie their shoes and never stood up again. The road signs here spoke in a quiet grammar. No, nonsense mileage, a clean font, a hint of older standards in the way exit numbers sat inside green shields. She let the odometer count, checked the mirrors without hurrying, and kept her mind on that thin balance of alert and calm that night driving needs. A weather app on her dash had told her about mist near the river, a crossing that always collected a little silver under the bridge. Otherwise, the night was fair. Ahead, a variable message sign woke up. Amber dots blossomed into letters that moved with a clarity that felt like a person laying a hand on a shoulder before speaking. Emergency corridor active MP, 88104. Keep right. Low beams. No stopping. Do not pace left lane. The phrasing wasn't scolding. It had the logic of a procedure read aloud during a drill, something practiced enough to be almost soothing. Celine let off the throttle a whisper and settled at 52, the speed that felt like it fit the sentence she'd just been handed. Low beams were already on. She nudged the left mirror down a few degrees out of habit, the same way one adjusts a shade when a neighboring window is bright, not to block out the world, just to keep from looking where eyes didn't need to go. A small radio sign below the message board hung from a post. Tune 1610 AM for advisory. She twisted the knob to that quiet sliver of the dial. Static gathered itself into a voice that could have been a dispatcher or a museum docent. It was composed and careful with each syllable. Attention eastbound between mile marker 88 and 104. Emergency corridor is in effect. Please remain in right lane. Maintain steady speed. Do not stop on shoulders. Avoid direct observation of left lane movements. Your cooperation creates a safe passage. Avoid direct observation. The wording nudged curiosity, like a door being closed gently in sight of a curious cat. Celine smiled despite herself, not at the instruction but at how perfectly human it was to have to be reminded. She let the smile fade. Night work rewarded a good ear. She would treat this like fog or a long construction zone. Accept it, adjust, continue. At mile 88, the spacing of the reflectors changed. The right lane markers looked brighter, as if each glass eye had been polished ahead of her. On the left, the edge line had a muted look, the way snow turns sound down when it wraps a landscape. The center barrier in this stretch was a taut run of cable and posts. Beyond it lay the left lane, black as a held breath, then a twin cable barrier for the westbound side. She eased into the right lane's groove and let the truck sit deep in it. The engine tone settled into the key she liked. The world narrowed in a useful way, less to look at, more to feel under the tires. From the marsh beyond the berm came the sound of something small moving in water, a soft slip of ripples almost lost under the hum of the road. A minute into the corridor, the AM voice returned, as if it had waited for her to hear the road change before speaking again. Eastbound, maintain your chosen speed. Do not attempt to match any adjacent movement. Headlights on low. Thank you. Adjacent movement. It was a careful phrase. It could have meant anything from a convoy of maintenance vehicles to something like an escorted lane. She had seen rolling roadblocks before. State troopers sweeping a stretch clean for debris, their lights an orchestrated ballet of red and blue. Those were all force and fanfare. This felt like quiet hands setting a table in another room. Movement began in the left lane. She didn't see it directly at first. She felt it. There's a way the air changes when large things pass nearby. A shrug of pressure, slight but undeniable, like someone walking by at close quarters with a coat that just brushes your sleeve. The left barrier cables hummed once, a note too low for a microphone and perfect for bones. It wasn't even a sound so much as a suggestion of one, as if the cables had remembered how to sing. A soft procession of light arrived, second-hand in the guardrail post's reflections, small and controlled, blooming and traveling and diminishing. She didn't lift her gaze to catch sources. She watched the rhythm go by at ankle level, a long, evenly spaced heartbeat that could have been nothing more than a well-coordinated convoy. That was likely what it was. Still, the left mirror catching a ghost of brightness made the part of her brain that catalogs shapes want to turn toward it. She didn't. There's a respect a person can offer by not insisting on making everything personal. Her CB clicked once, a polite throat clear. Eastbound in the corridor, declare speed, a voice said. The tag was numbers. It sounded like a person with a clipboard, but a calm clipboard. She keyed in without thinking about it long. 5, 2 and steady, she said. 5, 2 steady logged, came the reply. Thank you. Hold that. Another driver, somewhere behind, came through a moment later. 4, 8, he said. The voice had a little gravel and a little humor. Got a heavy. 4, 8 steady, logged. You're good, said the calm voice. Do not pace adjacent. The word paced ticked again in her mind as both a warning and a kindness. There are kinds of attention that become pursuit without meaning to be. She set her eyes just far enough ahead to make the next 30 seconds friendly and let the truck earn its keep in that simple way a machine loves. An overpass rose slowly into view, concrete gleaming pale, its sign telling a local road name that promised a cluster of houses under trees and a closed post office with a flag hung respectfully, even when nobody used the steps. On the pedestrian walkway's chain link appeared a maintenance worker's silhouette, still, reflective stripes catching like a moth in light when her headlights touched it. The figure lifted a hand palm outward once, not a wave, exactly. More like acknowledgement. Celine lifted a finger off the wheel in reply, a gesture scaled to match the brief encounter. Under the bridge, the sound changed in the expected way. The left lane's reflections rode the underside like minnows. Eastbound, you're doing fine, the AM advisory said with a composure that almost made her laugh. It might have been meant for everyone in general, but it also landed precisely in her cab like a note torn out of a spiral and slid through a crack in the door. Continue to mile 104. She passed an on-ramp where a trooper sat with a light bar powered up but steady, no flash. Cones guided entering traffic into a long yield that faded into nothing, as if anyone climbing on board here was being asked to fold themselves into the right lane without so much as a flicker in the left. The paint was immaculate, as if the lane had been drawn last Tuesday and not 10 years ago. The sign on the ramp's shoulder read, "Left lane reserved. Do not enter. Lane under temporary use." She thought about language's ability to make a thing sound both ordinary and extraordinary at once. Behind her now, another truck eased into the corridor and introduced himself on the CB with a handle that sounded like a brand of tool. "Copy on the corridor," he said. "First I've seen it. Little unusual. Keep your beams low and your eyes ahead," came another voice, unbothered, older. "It's like a night race you don't have to run in. Let it pass." Celine hadn't used the word passes to describe what was happening. Now that it had been given to her, the word fit neatly. A pass, like a pass of a river, or a mountain, can also mean permission. Maybe the left lane was granting it or receiving it. Either way, her job remained the same. Be a steady witness without intruding. At mile 93, the air cooled another degree, and a hush fell heavy in the marsh. The small animals that occasionally created tiny pops of noise in the reeds went quiet at once, the way they do when a shadow moves overhead. She counted reflectors for a minute to keep the counting part of her mind busy. 1, 2, 3, 4 to the next break in the barrier. Then 1, 2, 3 again. The sequence matched the tiny pitch shifts in the reefer's cycle, a private duet that belonged only to this cab. Once in the distance, the left mirror took a slice of light and turned it into a taut band across the glass. It had the color of old headlights and the steadiness of new ones. Not a flicker, no strobe, just a tone. She moved the mirror another hair down, so that the band rode across the pull handle on the door instead of her eye. The truck behind, the one with the tool handle voice, came in on the CB again. "I'm minding the right," he said, quiet as someone in a library. "They're really moving over there." "Hold what you got," the old voice said. "Someone else has the left." There's a kind of discipline drivers learn that is not about rules so much as about courtesy that turns into safety by habit. Celine rested in that. The urge to see gave way to the satisfaction of not needing the view. She passed an emergency U-turn crossover with its gate swung closed, the locked chain glowing a tiny bit under her low beams. A sign said, "Authorized vehicles only," and looked like it had been printed today, edges crisp, bolts shiny. Another advisory came through on the small AM speaker. "Approaching mile 100. Maintain. Do not stop on shoulders. If you must reduce speed, signal, and reduce gradually." Then, after a breath, "Thank you for creating space." The pronoun made her throat work a little on its own, unexpected. Creating space felt better than being told to stay out of the way. The language made a place in her mind for willingness. A minute later, a low whoosh rolled along the left barrier cables like wind through a harp. The pressure in the cab shifted just enough to remind her of an elevator easing to a stop. A faint, not quite echo found its way in under the engine's note. A whisper of tires without the hiss of water. The road was dry here, but still, tire noise has a quality you can tell even with your eyes closed. This sounded like tires belonging to a long time ago, and also to now. It was as if two chords had been played together. One on a new piano, one on an old upright down the hall. Mile 101. Mile 102. She watched the numbers appear and pass, tidy and logical. At 103, the marsh gave way to a field of scrub, and the sound changed again, less watery, more like a room with a carpet removed. The left lane's reflections slowed, then evened, then slipped away entirely. The advisory voice returned, slightly warmer, somehow. "Corridor ending ahead. Resume normal operations at mile marker 104. Thank you for your cooperation." The variable message sign that had begun the stretch appeared in reverse, positioned to stop the instruction precisely where it had needed to start. Its amber dots shut off in a single delicate blanking, like a person putting a finger to their lips to indicate a secret had been kept. The next sign said in stable letters, "Emergency corridor clear. Drive safely." She let something in her shoulders release that she hadn't noticed she'd been holding. Celine lifted the left mirror back to its usual angle and found the left lane solid and empty, black as cardstock. No ghosting, no afterimage. Just the lane a person would use to pass on a normal night when no other arrangements were in place. She breathed, a controlled exhale. The CB crackled. The older voice came back, not smug, not instructing, just companionable. "First time for you?" it asked again, in the tone of a hand extended to help with a step down. "First time seeing it labeled like that," she said. "I've heard a sweep or two, but nothing this quiet." "They do it a few times a year," the voice said. "Different reasons. Could be a stretch that needs to be kept undisturbed. Could be something headed faster than sirens like other places to be. Could be a drill to keep the muscle strong. Keep right, keep steady, don't count lights. Let them do what they came to do." He paused. "I figure it's a favor to the night to give it a lane when it asks." She didn't repeat the phrase, but she placed it carefully in her mind the way one sets down a warm mug where it won't tip. The driver with the tool handle voice came through on the CB once more. "Copy," he said simply, and then, "Thanks." The old voice said nothing else, as if the conversation had ended at the appropriate length. She clicked the AM advisory off. Music from another station found her cab late-night jazz that had the sound of a trumpet standing in a corner, playing to itself. She let it live below the engine tone, and the reefer's low hum for a while, the way a person lets a dog nap where the sunlight falls on the floor. At the river, the mist lay exactly as promised, a sheet of silver tucked under the bridge. She eased across, watching the thin drift swirl in the wake of the truck, and reform a second later like a handwritten line being rewritten. The rest of the run unfolded at a pace that felt like forgiveness. Toll booths appeared and were empty, then manned, then empty again. Overnight crews grooming shoulders for spring turned their heads briefly as she passed and returned to their work as if finishing a quiet paragraph. Days later, parked at a shipper's lot waiting on a door, she scrolled through her dash cam out of curiosity rather than doubt. The section from mile 88 to 104 looked ordinary in the way cameras flatten things. The left lane showed as a band of dark. Once, in a while, the software tried to put squares around nothing, a computer's way of guessing at motion where none showed. A few frames captured a soft smear of brightness in the left barrier, as if a reflection had been dragged like a fingertip across wet paint. The audio track recorded the advisory word for word, unremarkable and matter-of-fact. No tricks that would demand explanation. No footage that would change anyone's mind about anything. She closed the file and finished her paperwork with the unbothered thoroughness that kept her life on rails. On another run, far west of here, she saw different signs with a different style but the same instruction. Do not observe left lane. The typography was newer, the amber dots sharper, the mile markers a different paint. She kept right without question, her hands uncurious, her mind on tempo and distance. A small convoy of pilot cars with low, steady beacons flanked a section ahead like ushers at the back of a theater, not calling attention to themselves, only to the quiet they were preserving. She obliged. The lane to her left belonged to something else for a time. It neither asked for audience nor tolerated it, and that was fine. The night is wide enough for 1,000 arrangements. Back home between runs, she thought about the way a road can be many things at once. A promise, a choreography, a favor. There are nights that are all brass and neon and grease, full of noise and light and plum-sized raindrops. There are nights that are like a library after closing. On some of those, a lane is borrowed by a purpose that makes no demand on anyone, except that they hold their own course and resist the urge to turn their heads. That's not nothing. It asks a person to offer trust to something they have no proof for except the sign that says please. Months later, she crossed the same low country and saw no corridor signs, only a breakfast sky coming in early, pale over the marsh. Birds swept low in a democratic tangle. She rode through the place where the advisory had spoken and felt nothing different at all, which was its own reward. She kept her eyes on the friendly foreground and let the distance be exactly what it was. A road unburdened, waiting, a steady line inviting steady hands, nothing pressing in the next lane but what any of us bring when we move through the dark. She gave the night back its quiet, and it gave her the miles. Story number 5. The causeway cut a straight line across the flats like a pencil mark laid on glass. A driver named Noah rolled into that long, bright quiet with the windows sealed and the cab a little cooler than he needed, just enough to keep attention clear. Night had climbed all the way overhead. With no hills to catch it, the sky looked lower, as if he could reach up and smudge a star with a knuckle. On both sides, water lay shallow and still. Not a lake and not a field. Something in between brine pooled across the flats from late weather and late runoff. The surface held the moonless firmament like a second sky. He knew this stretch. He'd done it in full sun when heat made the world shiver. He'd done it in wind that came across the open like it had an appointment and didn't want to be late. Tonight, there was almost nothing. The tires sang a soft, steady note that made it easy to hold an exact speed. The trailer behind him carried shelves of hardware sealed in plastic, the sort of freight that doesn't ask for anything except to arrive as boxed and labeled as it left. His schedule was breathable. The next stop would open at 8. He had enough time to be careful without calling dispatch to explain why. The first sign that the night wanted something a little different announced itself without a sound. On his right, the reflection of his trailer in the water ran perfectly, a shadow rendered in starlight. On his left, the mirror did the same, perfect as well, until the left rear marker lights on the reflected trailer blinked in an easy pulse. His own marker lights were unsteady. He glanced down at his dash out of reflex. Nothing on the panel had tapped itself awake. He watched the reflected wink. 3 beats. Then, stillness. He lifted his foot the smallest amount, the way one might when approaching a pedestrian crossing in a quiet town, ready for a question he hadn't yet been asked. A moment later, a road sign rose up in the beam. Crosswind Aria ahead, it said, though the reeds on the far edge of the flats didn't bend, and the little patch of grass at a culvert felt untouched. He felt the faintest brush against the trailer's sidewall, a tentative palm, then nothing. The reflected marker lights didn't blink again. He breathed and let his hands rest light, adjusting by ounces. The sensation passed like a suggestion that had changed its mind. At mile 62 by the small, polite green sign, an alignment line of power poles strode away into the distance on the right. Their reflections planted identical feet in the left-hand water, precise and tall. Far ahead, a set of oncoming lights approached low, then lifted, the way headlights do along a long-run flat. He dropped his gaze to keep the light off his pupils and kept right. As the oncoming truck passed, its wind should have pushed a shrug through the space between. It didn't. The only confirmation of its passing was the thin silver of its reflection, carving itself into the dark water off his left shoulder. Running under his own reflected rig like 2 trains passing on 2 black burglarized tracks. When it was gone, the water settled, but his skin felt charged, the way air feels between one lightning flicker and the next. Noah wasn't superstitious. He was attentive. There's a difference. He'd grown up near an airfield and knew that flat places play tricks with light and sound. He cracked the window an inch and listened. The air smelled mineral and faintly sweet, like wet stone and clean iron, a scent the flats wore when they were pleased with the weather. The hiss of tires on fine salt dust was quieter than it had been hours ago on a grittier shoulder. He checked the mirror angles and put the radio down to a murmur, so the world could get a word in if it wanted. The next reflection came with its own counterpart. The left-hand mirror world trailer flipped its right blinker on. In the real world, his truck remained directionless. Ahead, the causeway shouldered to the right just a touch, then back. A gentle dogleg that never bothered anyone. The reflected blinker lit again, tick, 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 as if tapping the surface lightly with a fingertip. He scrubbed speed down a breath and set the wheel a hair to the right, lining up early like he would in ice. The dogleg arrived and went. A low wooden rail on the right, there more to make a point than to stop a vehicle, offered up a run of posts that made the shape of the curve easy to see. The reflection under that rail got darker suddenly, as if a band of heavier water had drifted across beneath it. He couldn't feel it, of course. The pavement stayed plain and even. He kept right anyway, because a suggestion is a tool, and sometimes the night is generous with tools. In his far beam's reach, something banded moved across the road slowly, not a hazard yet, just a shape. He lifted again. When the edge of the light caught it, the shape revealed itself as a line of small birds, shorebirds of some sort trotting on needle legs 2 by 2 across the asphalt. They weren't the kind to fly off crazy. They moved with the calm urgency of office workers at a crosswalk who know the light will change soon, heads bobbing, eyes black and extremely busy. He laughed once, softly, and let them have their moment. In the water below, not the road's reflection, but the water's own life sent a ripple of darker motion left to right, a shadow echo. The birds cleared. He rolled on. Then the reflection did something he couldn't absorb as a trick of optics. On the left, in the water-running world, the reflected truck rolled to where a straight open shoulder should have been an apron of plain, authoritative asphalt, and the image showed a barricade. Drums set in a close, polite row. Reflective bands like rings flashed by, narrow gap right before a drift of 10 more bands. In the actual world, in front of him, the shoulder was empty. He eased off 2 more miles per hour. The shoulder in his headlights stayed clean. The reflected drums blinked again under the surface. He had the sensation of standing next to a plate glass window and seeing a room inside that wasn't the one on his side of the glass. Something glanced on the truck's front fascia. Not a hit, just a pinprick strike of bug or seed or loose grit, and he placed that sensation in his pocket for later. Drums or no drums, he took the next 100 yards like a person stepping carefully in a dark hallway. The causeway narrowed to cross a culvert where the flats on one side sat a fraction higher than on the other. The water on the left pulled a barely perceptible trickle toward a lower pan, carving a thin, straight seam in the reflection. For 4 seconds, the reflected world looked cracked. The seam moved under his mirror truck, and then slid along the line of glowing road dots like a needle stitching 2 quilts together. By the time it was behind, the seam had sealed. Noah put the window back up and settled his hand closer to the top of the wheel, the way he did when he planned to make no sudden gestures. He wasn't nervous. He was alert in that particular way night sometimes asks for. A notch of extra attention dialed into the ridges on your fingerprints. He touched the turn signal stalk once, just to feel the click. His own dash ticked. The indicator blinked in that familiar green. In the water to his left, the reflection did not echo it. Instead, the reflected rig's brake lights bloomed once gently and faded, like a good driver tapping to wake a tailgater. There was no one behind him for half a mile. He gave the brake pedal a literal breath of pressure, not enough to feel on the rotor, enough to be symbolic, and looked ahead. Far down, the straight line of the causeway ended, and a small rise invited the road up and over a low rail line. The overcrossing would lift him just enough to see new horizon. Right before that, a pull-off appeared on the right. A rectangle of older pavement, darker from the last rain, with a trash barrel chained to a post and a battered sign that had once given a phone number for road conditions. For a second, in the water reflection world, the pull-off showed a white truck nose in, hazard flashers on, hood up. In the real world, the pull-off was empty. He slowed to a pace that didn't advertise itself, but would let him stop with dignity if need be, and watched the right shoulder. Nothing. As he passed the pull-off, his trailer creaked a single tired syllable in the way trailers do when straps flex. He checked his mirrors, looked at the top corner of the trailer like a person looks at a stranger they feel might know their name, and thought about the reflected brake lights again. He took the rise at a tidy speed and set the bridge behind him. On the other side, the flats widened, broken only by thin islets of dry salt, where wind had piled the crystals in little drifts like tiny snow dunes. That's where the animals showed up. Not deer, too open, not cattle, too remote, but a string of long-legged shadows, like moving fence pickets waiting. Antelope, probably he hadn't known they liked the edges this much. They crossed the road ahead in a measured file, each one committing to the move, like soldiers who had practiced it. He stopped. They paused, checked him. Ears like new leaves swiveled his way, then carried on. In the reflection, he saw them twice, once above, once below, antelope sliding across stars. When the last hindquarters were passed, he rolled forward with care. If he hadn't eased when the reflection tapped the brakes at the pull-off, he would have met them at a poor angle. The causeway continued. A sign warned of a maintenance vehicle ahead. He saw no yellow beacons. He put that too in the pocket of his mind, where small, useful warnings go to earn their keep, and carried on. The water on the left thickened with a pale film in places. In that film, he saw, not ahead, but exactly alongside, a different truck keeping his pace under the surface. An older conventional with fenders like shoulders, paint a satin black with a hand-done logo, so worn it read only as a shape. The hand on that wheel, if there was one, did not show. The nasal grumble of an older engine did not reach his cab. Still, the reflected truck held form long enough that he found himself giving it room, not to let it pass. It couldn't, being in water. But the way people make room for each other on a staircase out of courtesy, it drifted away behind after a minute, and was gone. He didn't chase it with his eyes. He didn't speed up to see if the reflections played games with the geometry that way. He let it exit his life the same way it had entered politely. On clear nights, illusions are just another language the world speaks. Noah treated them exactly like words. Meaning when needed, music when not. The CB roused for a moment, a local driver asking after spray on a different stretch, and then sat back down. In the tiny distance that belongs only to flat places, 3 red tower lights counted their own seconds. Blink, 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 blink. The reefer behind him took a breath and exhaled to keep its promise of temperature. His hands liked where they were. There is a point out there where the flats give way to ground so dry it can hold a fence post without the brine climbing to find its ankles. As he crossed that invisible threshold, the reflections lost some of their certainty. The water's skin wrinkled, a hush of air nosed across, and what had been a steady mirror turned into a lively guessing game. The left-hand reflected trailer's marker lights blinked once more, as if to say that part of the help was over. He nodded. To himself, or to both versions of his rig, he couldn't have said. At the next turnout, that could truly be called a rest area. Just an apron of room with 2 lamps which burned that sodium color that makes everything look bruised. He pulled off, not out of fear, simply to step onto ground that didn't show stars in all directions. The lamps hummed in that homey way humming lamps do. The trash can clanked like a cowbell as a small wind fingered it. He walked his rig in a slow, practice square. A strap on the rear starboard pallet had eased an inch at some point, not slack, but less neat than he thought he'd set it. He ratcheted it, making it sing. He ran a hand along the sidewall, palm open, a gesture which never tells his mind anything his eyes don't provide but which the body insists on anyway. On the bumper of the trash barrel, someone had stuck a reflective square of tape. It flashed blue-white in his headlamp, not amber. He thought of the orchard road he'd once heard a man mention at another stop, then let the thought go. He didn't need to collect connections like souvenirs. In the little brick building with the restrooms, a vending machine offered bottled water and a selection of snacks that had as many dental opinions as ingredients. He bought a water. The machine thunked it down with a stately reluctance, as though water should be poured and not dropped. On the corkboard by the door, a weather note from the state, printed 6 weeks ago, said, "Inversion nights produce visual aberrations across flats. Drive with care." The word aberrations was so tidy it almost passed for politeness. He took the water back out into the hum and the good cold air and drank half. A pickup eased into the far corner of the turnout and idled with the kind of confident sound that suggests a person who takes very good care of their vehicle. The driver stepped out in a high-vis jacket that had been washed so many times it had gone from day glow to a calm lemon. He gave Noah a nod and glanced reflexively at the flats. "Calm night," he said, which could have been a statement or a question. "Mostly," Noah said. When you're a stranger at a turnout in the dark, the right number of words is usually fewer than your mouth thinks it wants to give away. But the man's voice had the easy courtesy of a person who knows the place. "Reflections are lively. They get ahead of you sometimes," the man said. "Way the air sits, way the water lays, way the salt makes a lens. You'll get a hint of what's around the corner. First time, folks get spooked. Second time, they use it like a good mirror before changing lanes." He smiled, but only with part of his face. "I tell people, don't ignore it, and don't trust it too much. Let it tap on the glass, but you make the move." Noah nodded, the way people nod when the thing they've already been practicing gets proven to them from the outside. "Saw animals," he said. "Birds, then antelope. The mirror mentioned them first." "Good mirror," the man said mildly, like he was complimenting a well-organized toolbox. He looked at Noah's trailer. "You're strapped tighty. You'll be all right." They let the silence be comfortable. The pickup pulled back onto the causeway and vanished in a line of light. Noah climbed into the cab, set the bottle in the holder, and eased onto the world again. When the flats ended for good, replaced by scrub that shrugged off reflections and hills that reasserted the sky's proper distance, the peculiar double vision faded. He was left with his own markers and signs and the ordinary, excellent company of lines painted by people with good hands. He checked his clock. He had not lost time. He had not gained it. He had distributed it wisely across a place that allowed him to glimpse just a breath ahead and use the look. At dawn, when light came up like someone turned a dimmer instead of a switch, he watched the flats in his right mirror turning from black to pewter to white. The water's skin picked up a breeze and lost its opinions. The causeway he'd crossed with careful attention was now a boring straightaway that would lull any day driver into a song. He was grateful it had been more than that for him in the night. He delivered on schedule, paperwork signed with the flourish of a receiver who liked their pen. He slept the clean sleep of a person whose body did nothing more interesting all night than steer and not be fooled. A week later, routing took him back over the same stretch just after sunset. He wondered if the flats would offer the same kindness again, or if that had been a one-night favor not to be counted on. The causeway, as he approached, looked innocent. Water held stars, yes, but not as confidently. He rolled out on it with no expectation and the same readiness to pay attention. Somewhere around mile 64 this time, the left-hand reflection put on his left blinker one beat before he did, and he laughed alone in his cab once, because it felt like being taught a game by someone who had been waiting for him to remember the rules. He used the mirror as a suggestion, not as a command. He adjusted where it made sense. He eased where it advised. He ignored it when the actual road said otherwise. The balance felt right, like two people carrying a couch together without discussing where to put their hands. The wind came over later, playful, and he leaned into it the way a person leans into a friend's shoulder in a photograph to show they like the arrangement. Back at a different service area, behind a different glass door with different humming lamps, he saw a bulletin put up by a state college. Research participants, needed atmospheric optics of alkali flats. The colors on the post were too cheerful for midnight science, but the idea made him smile. He wasn't interested in turning his nights into homework. He was glad someone was asking the sky what it meant by its tricks. He already knew what they were for. Small taps on the glass to teach a person to drive by more than one kind of light. By the time the long season turned and the flats went hard and the water pulled back into basins that didn't bother the causeway, the reflections had less to say. He still crossed at night when the route called for it. He still drove like the road had a mind worth listening to. Sometimes he caught a whisper under his hand on the wheel, as if the truck itself liked the thin places where two versions of a thing sat on top of each other for a while, and sometimes he didn't. He didn't ask for weirdness. He didn't chase it. He just kept to the painted lines, made space, used mirrors in both directions, and let the night be wide enough to hold every calm and every odd that helped him carry his freight. Somewhere under starfields that changed personalities with weather and miles, the flats waited for the next driver to come across on a dark, windless run. The mirror would act up or it wouldn't. A pull-off would hold a warning under the surface or it wouldn't. A line of animals would test the patience of 4 tires and a good hand, or they'd be somewhere else entirely that night. The only promises the place made were the same ones the rest of the road makes in its best mood. Go steady, pay attention, and someone you can't see might be helping from just out of view. Story number 6. The interstate unspooled like ribbon along the edge of a wide river valley, and the night had that particular stillness that makes distant lights feel carefully placed. A driver named Rowan kept a measured hand on the wheel. The truck's hum laid under everything like a calm bass line. The trailer held pallets of fluorescent bulbs and cardboard shades light, ironically wrapped in darkness. The route looked simple on paper. A midnight pick in one town, a dawn drop 2 states over, a line almost straight if you ignored how rivers bend the world into careful curves. The yard gate had clicked shut behind, a bell on a chain doing a polite little jingle as the guard returned to his stool. The bell sound stuck with Rowan unremarkable, but it sat in the pocket of the mind where small things keep speaking after they're done. They pulled onto the ramp and let the rig settle into the right lane's groove. The air was cool enough to see breath if a window were down. Rowan liked nights like this, where the highway's logic ran clean and the dark asked for attention without scolding. The first hour was uneventful in the way that counts as a blessing. A single trooper sat quiet under an overpass. A distant freight made its own weather along the rail line a mile to the north. The reefer 2 trucks ahead purred a steady temperature like a lullaby to itself. Radio chatter was minimal. A heads up about a ladder on a shoulder 40 miles behind. A cheerful exchange about a diner that had started to keep pie after midnight. Useful, human, small. Just past mile 171, the variable message sign ahead winked awake 1 amber dot at a time. Emergency corridor active. MP 176, 184. Keep right. Low beams. Do not observe adjacent lane. The words arrived with the practiced calm of someone who doesn't want to be dramatic but absolutely wants to be understood. Rowan dropped a few miles per hour, slid deeper into the right lane as if tucking in a sheet, and tuned the dash radio to 1,610 AM, because a small placard below the sign suggested it. Attention eastbound, the low-power voice said. Composed, present. Corridor begins 5 miles ahead. Maintain steady speed. Remain in the right lane. Avoid direct observation of the adjacent lane. Thank you for creating space. The phrasing was tidy, the courtesy plain. The left mirror got a gentle nudge downward, not to pretend nothing existed over there, only to keep habit from indulging curiosity. The engine note settled at 53. Rowan's hands liked that number, and so did the night. At mile 176, the road put on a quieter face. The right lane reflectors looked freshly washed, returning the low beams with a small confidence. The left lane deepened as if the asphalt there had been laid more recently or less, so it was hard to tell which. Pressure changed minutely, a sensation like standing near a door someone opened 2 rooms away. A soft train of light moved through the cable barrier to the left. Not a flash, not a show, just an insinuation of something passing with intent. The AM voice returned in a level tone. Maintain. Thank you. Rowan did. A maintenance pickup sat on the shoulder with a beacon glowing slow and low, more like a nightlight than an alarm. A worker on a pedway above lifted a palm once in acknowledgement. The truck hummed on, a small thing among larger purpose. The corridor ended as cleanly as it began. Emergency corridor clear, said the next message, then went dark with a neat little blink. The left mirror lifted back. The lane there returned to plain road, clean and empty, as if nothing had happened except exactly what had been needed. A minute later, the river showed itself across marsh and floodplain, the lights of a small town sliding along its far bank like coins on a table. Fog gathered low under the bridge, the careful sort, silvered at the edges. Watch for patchy fog at the river. A voice came across the CB in a tone that made a person want to follow its advice even if it hadn't said please. It was a voice that didn't have to identify itself to sound familiar. From the speakers, static arranged itself into something like the sound of a clip being set on a clipboard. Take it easy on the downhill. Rowan smiled without deciding to. The rig coasted down with the kind of finesse old trucks and attentive drivers bring out of each other. The fog lay obediently in the low ground, and the tires thumped just a touch differently across the expansion joints. Soft, then softer, then normal again on the far bank. The exit signs here wore an older typeface, and their green looked a degree warmer, as if the paint had learned sunlight by heart and kept a little of it. A way station sign announced itself 2 miles later. Open, with an arrow that had been designed by a hand that liked symmetry. Rowan had rolled past this station dozens of times. Closed, cones set in a patient row. Tonight, the cones sat off to the side like well-behaved guests. A short amber, open, buzzed softly in a window of the little brick building. It felt both tidy and slightly out of time, like a fresh uniform cut to an older pattern. The scales live board switched from black to green as the rig approached, and a speaker by the glass crackled with a voice that landed in the cab like a note slid under a door. Evening. Brake at the pad. You're good. The numbers on the scale came up clean. The voice, never hurried, came again. Logs in order? No suspicion. Just ritual. Rowan lifted the ELD tablet out of its dock. The screen had dimmed itself in the way screens do to preserve eyes at midnight, and for a blink it didn't show the usual grid, only a bar with the words, driving unassigned. The caret blinked like a patient finger tapping. Then the expected view returned. Line neatly across, time matching. Out of reflex more than necessity, Rowan reached into the side pocket and pulled out the paper logbook kept as a backup, a comfort thing like an old map in the glove box. The pages smelled faintly of ink and coffee. Hold your place, the voice said, but not to the logbook. It sounded more like the kind of phrase crews use on radios when they're lining up a sequence. A door opened. A bell on a short chain made the tiny sound of a familiar store. A man in a neat uniform stepped to the edge of the overhang. He didn't come close. He lifted a hand in that calm way that said, "You there, me here." Not unfriendly. You're good to roll. Fog pool ahead, keep low beams. He glanced at the logbook once, and with a small, exact motion, stamped the bottom corner of the open page. The stamp smelled faintly of fresh rubber. Smooth sailing. Eastbound. Rowan checked the stamp without really meaning to, the way a person glances at a receipt they already trust. The state seal sat there, a little different than the one on current forms. Eagle turned this way instead of that. The date came through clean. June 19. The last digits softened where the ink had pooled. The book went back to the pocket as if it had a mind to return to its place. Clear to go, the light board said, flipping to green with a hum as modest as a fridge. The rig rolled. The ramp back to the interstate rejoined with politeness. The merge long enough for a generous breath. Within 2 miles, a sign for a service plaza rose out of the dark. Golden Basin in a friendly font. Icons for showers and coffee and a dog patch. Rowan didn't need anything but glance and go. But there's a comfort in passing a place that stays open through the long hours, even if you don't go in. The layout under the lamps looked different than the ones several states west that carried the same name, a variation on a theme. A maintenance cart deadled along, beacon turning slow as the phases of the moon. Under a domed lens lamp at the far corner, an older exit arrow showed through paint like a pencil line under a fresher stroke. It would have been easy to stop. The plaza had that gentle gravity some places get at night, inviting a pause. Rowan kept moving. The road felt like a conversation that had just gotten to the good part. Leaving for a cup would be like stepping out to answer a phone call during a favorite paragraph. The sign for the next town read with a pleasant certainty, and the CB was quiet the way a room is quiet when someone is working and is being left alone to do it. The river valley gave way to low hills, and then to a level reach where lint white in the air suggested the flats were coming, the kind of salt pans that borrow and return the sky. By the time the highway stepped onto the causeway, the night had gone very clear. Reflections slipped to the truck's left like a duplicate world. For a few minutes, the mirrored trailer kept perfect time. Then the left side ghost put on a right blinker twice in the water with a calm tick. The real dash showed nothing. Ahead, the right shoulder ran a little narrow, where a culvert's concrete throat chewed away a foot of pavement. Rowan eased right even so, taking the dogleg gently, and felt the good feeling a person gets when they follow a suggestion that asks for almost nothing but prevents a small annoyance. A line of birds then trotted across as if called back for a second scene. Long-legged, nimble, heads like tiny metronomes, counting in silver. The reflection showed them a breath before they appeared in the headlight reach. Rowan laughed once. In that delighted way humans sometimes acknowledge coincidence. The antelope didn't show tonight. A low pickup did, far ahead, pacing in the opposite lane. Its reflection snagged in the water dark and cut through the mirror world like a knife in cloth. The wind that should have passed when it went by didn't arrive. The night laid hands flat again. Eastbound, a friendly voice asked on the CB in a style that felt practiced without being stiff. Declare. Speed. Rowan keyed the mic. 5, 3, and steady. 5-3 logged. You're doing fine, came the reply. And there was something about the phrase doing fine that felt like a pat on the shoulder without any touch. Miles collected. Signs counted down to a junction with another interstate like a list in a careful notebook. At a rest area, just a lay-by with 2 lamps and a brick building that echoed footsteps even in memory, Rowan pulled in for a stretch. The lamps hummed that homely hum. The trash can lid clinked once in a light breeze. On the corkboard inside, a weather note warned soft at the corners read, Inversion Night's Produce, Unusual Reflections. Drive with care. The word unusual did not try to be dramatic. On a counter by the coffee urn, a stack of sleeves waited. Someone had stamped them with an old logo, a bird in a circle, wings making a coin shape. Rowan slid one on, the paper warm from another driver's recent cup, and stepped back out. A pickup wearing county markings idled near the exit with the competence of a well-tended machine. The driver, jacket washed paler by years of maintenance loops, lifted his chin in greeting. Clear night, he said, agreeable. Clear, Rowan said, returning the nod. Let the mirrors help you, not boss you, the man offered in a tone that suggested experience, not a lesson. They get enthusiastic out there. Rowan thanked him with exactly the number of words the moment warranted. The fuel island far away threw its orange glow against the sky like a polite reminder of civilization. The reefer behind kept its own rhythm. A sign past the exit arrow pointed toward a historic marker that nobody reads at 3 in the morning. The road waited, attentive as a dog waiting for its name. Beyond the flats, a long grade lifted. The AM advisory was quiet now, but the memory of its voice sat ready in case it returned. Past the ridge, a sign with a small number in a corner, read like a page number in a novel. The highway had started to feel like a continuous thing wearing different faces. Bridge, causeway, main line, orchard cutoff, service ramp, each borrowing parts from nights that had gone before. It was a comforting idea. It made the night seem like a team. An hour from the receiver, fog drifted in sheets, elegant, not heavy. The voice returned. Not the AM this time, but the one that had spoken at the way station and then in the corridor and then once, somewhere else in the night. It had the clean patience of someone whose job is to get people home without explaining all the ways they do it. Easy on the downhill, it said, and then, watch for patchy fog at the river. It's a low night. Copy, Rowan said aloud without keying anything. A habit so ingrained that saying it felt like tapping a ring on a tabletop. They came off the grade and into the lowland, fog cradled in the folds. The bridge wore a simple handrail, and the river spoke in that quiet way rivers do when it's not their turn. On the far side, the access road to the industrial park took shape in a measured fan of signs: receive, ship, visitor. Rowan followed the signs that mattered in that hour. The guard shack door opened, and the bell on a short chain sang its two-note song. The guard wore a current jacket with a reflective stripe, a cap with the company name stitched in fresh thread, and the tired kindness of someone near the end of a long shift. He looked at the bill of lading, nodded, and handed it back with a stamp. The stamp was purple and neat. It pressed the company emblem in ink that looked like it would dry fast and last a long time. Rowan felt in the pocket almost before thinking, and drew the paper logbook out as if it wanted air. In the lower corner of the page where the weighman's hand had made its mark, the purple seal sat as it had before. An eagle turned slightly the wrong way. Ink caught at the date. June 19. The new stamp from the guard landed above it, crisp, modern. 2 purple circles on paper, in 2 slightly different languages, both saying you're allowed to be where you are. The receiver's dock light clicked on with a satisfying click. Rowan backed in on one clean pull, glad for the way distance teaches depth without scolding. Pallets would come off, signatures would meet their lines, and the world would get the bulbs and shades it had asked to have by morning. It all would look ordinary in the bright warehouse air, the night's peculiar order folded away behind the days. When the truck sat still, and the engine ticked its soft cooling ticks, the CB breathed once and let out a short, polite chirp. Then, as if the words had been waiting for the cab to be quiet enough to hear them clearly, came the same voice, not dramatic, not spooky, as present and unbothered as a hand steadying a stack of papers before a breeze. Safe night. Eastbound. Keep it steady. Out in the yard, a bird on a light pole shook itself awake. The fog lifted a finger to the sun and then let go of the field. The way station back down the road would close later and open another night, or it wouldn't. The orchard cutoff might place its blue chevrons again for someone else, or not. The service plaza might tilt a traveler gently toward a nap, at a moment when a nap would do the most good. A maintenance cart might finish its loop and park under a domed lens that hummed only when needed. The reflections in the flats would show a few seconds ahead to someone with a patient hand. The corridor would open its quiet lane when purpose asked for it. Rowan set the brake and let shoulders drop, the kind of release a person doesn't get from explanation but from completion. The logbook went back in its pocket with the purple circles. The ELD blinked awake, exactly as modern as it needed to be. The road had behaved like a collection of careful favors, borrowed from other hours and older alignments, arranged by voices that didn't insist on being named. The best part of the night was that it did not ask to be understood beyond the instructions it gave. Keep right. Keep steady. Eyes ahead. Go easy on the downhill. Someone would run the left lane when it wasn't for you. Someone would be counting, not to keep score, only to know when to lower a hand and say, "You're good to roll." When the dock bell rang and the first pallet eased away, the echo was merely work doing what work does. In the quiet that followed, the sense remained that the road can sometimes be more than the sum of its striping and shoulders, that in the longest hours, when a driver learns to hear the small pauses between instructions, the highway borrows old shapes and old hands and lays them across the map like a fine thread, guiding, not grabbing, always putting you down where morning can find you. As the rain fades and the road quiets, remember not every story ends when the engine stops. Out there, Beyond the glow of the dashboard, some shadows still move, waiting for another traveler to cross their path. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. Don't forget to like this video, share your own chilling experience in the comments, and subscribe to The Sleep Haunt so you never miss another night on the haunted highways. Sleep well, if you can.